On the 9th of May 1996, as midnight approached, a small group of climbers set out from a high encampment on the upper reaches of one of the tallest mountains in the world. Today was to be the culmination of months of grueling effort, tens of thousands of dollars spent, years of dreaming and training. Today, they were going to hike to the summit of Mount Everest. At least, that was the plan. But before the day was over, many of these intrepid explorers would, unfortunately, have hiked to their death. Mount Everest is the highest peak in the world. For this reason, the mountain, inhospitable though it is, has long been an object of fascination for hikers and explorers. Thousands of people want to climb to its summit, a point in space that is sometimes referred to as the roof of the world. The first people ever to summit Everest were explorer Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay. In 1953, as part of a British expedition, the pair struck out for the as-yet unconquered peak of the mountain on the 28th of May, and reached it on the morning of the 29th. The pair, freezing cold and exhausted by the climb, spent 15 minutes at the highest point on Earth. Edmund left a small cross there, and Tenzing left an offering of chocolate before they turned around and began their descent. The pair made it down the mountain alive and became famous in their respective countries for having summited a mountain that many had thought unconquerable. Hillary was knighted, and Tenzing was claimed as a national hero by 3 different countries. Climbing Everest was the crowning achievement of their lives. They were the first, but more followed. Over the next few decades, Everest was summited more than 100 times. Over time, technology developed, routes became more established, and more experienced guides spent more time on the mountain. Slowly, summiting Everest became more and more possible for more and more people. Previously, only exceptionally skilled and dedicated climbers could have ever hoped to conquer the mountain. But by the 1980s, several less experienced climbers, aided by top-of-the-line equipment and experienced guides, successfully completed the climb. Their success encouraged others, and soon climbing Everest was something that seemed within reach of even relatively amateur climbers. Several profitable private companies sprang up to help these people realize their dream. The fees charged by these companies and by the governments of China and Nepal for access to the mountain were substantial. But for climbers with Everest as their goal, money was often no object. It became routine for climbers to pay more than $50,000 each to be guided up the mountain. By the 1990s, there was a growing sense that Everest, once a terrifying and awe-inspiring natural wonder, was becoming commercialized. Tour companies vying to outperform one another took risks, welcomed increasingly inexperienced clients, and often left trash on the once pristine slopes of the mountain. Despite these concerns, expeditions up Everest were more in demand than ever. Most climbers followed one of 2 main routes up Everest, one approaching from the southeast, starting in Nepal, and one approaching from the north, starting in Tibet. Climbing was done in stages, with climbers spending weeks resting at camps along the way to allow their bodies to adjust to the altitude. The danger of altitude sickness was particularly acute during the hike from the final camp up to the summit and back again. This part of the climb took place in what is called the death zone, an area above 8,000 meters or 26,200 feet, where there is just 1/3 of the oxygen you'd find at sea level. To survive in the death zone, most climbers must use bottled oxygen, but can only carry so many heavy tanks of it. For this reason, the climb from the final camp to the summit and back again must be done quickly, allowing only a brief moment standing at the roof of the world. Even passing into and out of the death zone as quickly as possible, climbers are at risk of altitude sickness. Almost all climbers suffer from headaches, nausea and exhaustion due to the altitude, but some may suffer yet more debilitating symptoms: a loss of sight, confusion due to hypoxia, difficulty breathing, and fluid in the lungs that can lead to death. The dangers of strenuous hiking at high altitude are, of course, in addition to a myriad other hazards, such as cold, exhaustion, avalanches, and ice falls. Summiting Everest is, for a small number of climbers each year, the last thing they ever do. At around 11:30 p.m. on the 9th of May 1996, several groups set out for a summit attempt on Mount Everest. On the northern route was an expedition by members of the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, while on the southeast route were two large guided groups organised by private companies. One group was from the New Zealand company Adventure Consultants, led by 35-year-old veteran climber Robert Hall, and consisting of 3 guides, 8 clients, and 7 Sherpas. The other large group was from the American company Mountain Madness, led by 40-year-old mountaineer Scott Fischer, and consisting of 3 guides, 8 clients, and 8 Sherpas. These 2 groups collaborated on their plan for the day. As they were among the first groups to attempt the summit that season, there were very few fixed ropes in place up ahead. They decided to send Sherpas ahead to install ropes at the most difficult points of the climb. However, for an unknown reason, most likely the fact that one Sherpa was unwell, this did not happen. As a result, the ascent to the summit was a slow one. The groups had to stop mid-climb for up to an hour at a time while ropes were installed by the group leaders, and then had to wait even longer due to overcrowding. This was particularly bad at the Hillary Step, a vertical ascent by rope just before the final hike to the summit. Since only one climber could ascend or descend at a time, there was, in effect, a traffic jam at this point in the climb, resulting in significant further delays. Normally, climbers must reach the summit by 2 p.m. This is a generally agreed upon turnaround time, a time when parties must turn back even if they are within sight of the summit, in order to get back to camp safely before darkness sets in. On the 10th of May, 1996, many climbers reached the summit much later than 2 p.m. Darkness was already falling as they started to make their way down, something that was only made more nightmarish when a storm swept in, bringing howling winds, hail, and snow that eliminated tracks and reduced visibility to 0. Different climbers faced different fates as they tackled this terrifying collision of circumstances. 46-year-old Doug Hansen was a postal worker and amateur climber. He was an Adventure Consultants client, and his expedition up until the summit push had been a tough one. He was suffering from frostbite and was also recovering from a minor throat surgery he'd had earlier that year. The day before the summit attempt, he told others in the group that he felt bad and was worried that it was a bad idea. Nonetheless, he set out with the others at around 11:30 p.m. on the 9th of May. By the early hours of the following morning, he appeared to be in difficulty. Other climbers observed that he was visibly struggling. He wasn't alone in this. 5 out of the 8 clients on the Adventure Consultants team gave up and headed back to camp. But Doug, determined to make the summit, carried on. With assistance, he made it up the Hillary Step, arriving at the top at around 3 p.m, already well past the safe turnaround time. Sherpa and guide Ang Dorje met Doug at the top of the step and told him to turn around, but Doug simply shook his head and pointed toward the summit. It was tantalizingly close, and he did not wish to give up now. He continued up the mountain. His persistence paid off. He did indeed make it to the summit, albeit very late in the day, and with very little oxygen left. Adventure Consultants expedition leader Robert Hall helped him descend to the Hillary Step before the blizzard closed in, and there, at the top of the icy vertical climb, the pair became stuck. Doug was exhausted and unwell and couldn't manage the climb without fresh oxygen. But there was no fresh oxygen to be had. As the weather closed in, expedition leader Robert Hall was faced with an impossible choice. Doug was unlikely to survive, but Robert could, perhaps, save himself if he abandoned his client on the mountain. Indeed, he was advised on a radio call to base camp to do just that. Leave Doug and get himself down safe. Robert declined this course of action and radioed back with annoyance, saying, "We're both listening." They stayed together at the top of the step, attempting to wait out the storm. They didn't make it. When Robert made radio contact again in the morning, it was to say, simply, that Doug was gone. It later appeared that Doug had either died of exposure or had fallen from a cliff in the night. His body was never found. Rob, now alone, attempted to make his way down the mountain, but faced incredible difficulties in doing so. The regulator of his breathing apparatus was clogged with ice. His hands and feet were frostbitten and immobile. He was exhausted and freezing cold. In the afternoon of the 11th of May, he radioed base camp again and asked to be patched through to his wife via satellite phone. The connection was made. Robert said a final goodbye to his wife. He reassured her that he was not in pain and asked her not to worry too much. Soon thereafter, Robert Hall passed away as well. Scott Fischer, experienced climber and leader of the Mountain Madness team, was rather tired when he began the summit attempt on the 9th of May. In the days before the attempt, he had unexpectedly had to hike down to base camp and back up again to assist a friend who was experiencing a medical issue. Now he was suffering the effects of a lack of proper rest and the rapid changes in altitude. Further to this, the delays caused by no ropes being in place and the subsequent bottlenecks meant that his team took a long time to reach the summit. By the time he finally joined them there, it was 3:45 p.m., long past the safe turnaround time. In addition to this, Scott was also gravely ill. He was breathing heavily and complaining that he needed medication for his stomach. This was extremely unusual for the normally very stoic Scott. He started to make his way back to camp with Sherpa Lopsang, a longtime friend of his, but Scott's condition only worsened during the descent. He now appeared confused. He removed his oxygen mask and said repeatedly that he was too tired to descend in the normal manner and would instead jump. Worried, Lopsang attached himself to Scott by a rope and herded him down the mountain as best he could. Eventually, though, the pair were pinned down by the blizzard. Scott could not go on. After sheltering in place for a few hours, the pair were joined by another small group consisting of Malaysian climber Makalu Gao and his two Sherpas. Makalu was almost as ill as Scott, but was just about able to walk. Scott begged Lopsang and the other Sherpas to leave him, hike down to camp and send back help. Lopsang strapped an oxygen mask to Scott's face and, with regret, left his friend on the mountainside. Working together, the three Sherpas were able to carry Makalu back to camp and raise the alarm. By the time he was found, however, Scott had passed away. His oxygen mask was still attached to his face, but he had partially removed some of his outer clothing. It was theorized that he had experienced acute hypothermia, a deadly condition that can make its sufferers feel uncomfortably warm, and thus lead to them removing clothing and freezing to death. Both expedition leaders, then, were dead, but they were not the only ones stuck on the mountain in the midst of the storm. Dozens more climbers, if not rescued, faced a similar, horrifying, and lonely fate.